Now that everything down from the forecastle deck and quarterdeck has been installed, there's no longer a need for me to flip the ship over to install anything. The hull is essentially complete. That means I can start working on the more delicate structures that go above the main deck without worrying about damaging them by flipping the ship over to work underneath the hull. The part of the ship that I'm going to be working on now is the construction of this bridge area. Ideally, this structure would have been completed before finishing the hull, but that was not possible because this is quite a complex part of the ship, and it would be very difficult to build this in its entirety while glued onto the ship, especially considering that there are multiple joint lines that need to be filled and sanded out. So what I had done was I had looked at this area and tried to determine the minimal amount of join lines that I'd have to sand while this is connected to the ship. And I figured that this joint line here is the best bet. So if I can construct this entire structure off the ship, have it sanded, have photo etch installed, and have it painted before gluing it on the ship, then when I do glue it on the ship, I don't need to worry about this small joint line over there, and everything else should fit in place. Obviously, when blending that in, there will be a bit of damage to this area of the ship, which will need to be corrected and repainted, but that's not a very big area to deal with. I just think that would be a better way to go about it. I think if I were to glue this down onto the ship, level by level, as it is depicted in the manual, it would be very difficult to remove these seam lines. It's just that the ship is so big that maneuvering it and swinging it around to get all the right angles will be difficult. So I'll build it on its own, stick it down, and then sand out that line. The intention is to build the structure as minimally as possible off the ship, so I won't be installing details like searchlights. In fact, I'll be installing only what is required for me to expose seam lines that then need to be filled and sanded. If it's not going to result in a seam line that I need to remove, or if it's not something that's going to be covered and make it difficult for me to install at a later point, I'm going to then leave it off during this phase of the construction. Those smaller detailed pieces I prefer to install onto the ship once it is stuck down. That's just to make them easier to handle. Obviously, having the entire hull of the ship to handle is a lot easier than trying to handle very small and highly detailed parts. It's just a matter of having a place to hold the components. Another consideration that I can see right off the bat, once again, these ladders have these plastic landings that need to be filled into this hole over here to make the deck flush. It's a bit awkward, but I think in this case now, to keep these holes the correct size, I will cut off the top of those landings and install them in that hole. I think the distance between these openings and the openings on the shelter deck are far enough away for it not to look odd that they'll be of different sizes. Since it is a bit difficult to see what is actually required from just looking at these drawings, the next step is to start cutting the parts off of the sprue to see actually what needs to be in place for me to construct this part of the superstructure. All of the components for this bridge section of the superstructure come on sprue A. The sprue was mostly intact. One piece did come knocked off, but the part itself is in good condition, so that's not a problem. Yet again, the unfortunate theme of flashing continues. These parts, though, don't have too much. This is by far the worst, and they are generally quite square parts, so removing this flashing shouldn't be difficult. But it's just unfortunate that there is, yet again, more flashing on this model. Having said that, this is a 2005 model, so it's probably stamped out a few kits by now. I think the best way to do this is to start at the bottom and work my way up. So it's pretty clear that all of this is going to have to be glued down in one go. Into these notches goes B1. I think I'll be able to install those at a later point. But that sits quite nicely on top of all of this. That's going to give this some strength. There aren't very many details underneath for the correct place to locate these parts, which is a bit unfortunate. I would have hoped there'd be some lines over here like there are at the base. These hut type structures get replaced by photo etch. Obviously all these stairways get replaced by photo etch as well, along with the ready lockers. But this structure doesn't get replaced with photo etch, and neither does the bridge. I'm going to leave that off for now since it's quite independent of this structure, but I believe it connects up later on, so I don't think I'm going to be able to avoid it forever, and that's a bit unfortunate. Because you see, this piece goes on, and that needs to be blended in over there, which means I need to build that bit in the middle. So that takes us back to A13 and 14. I'm concerned about the clearance over here, which means I think I might need to construct these photo etch parts and install them before I install this upper level. As for these structures on the wings, they're also a bit of a problem. They have to notch in, you can see over there, which means they need to be constructed as well. These aren't a problem since they sit clear of everything, but there's still more that goes on top over here, so I need to find what's next there. And then on top of that circle goes a rangefinder, and rangefinders obviously need a turn, which means that there will be a visible joint line over there that should be there, so that doesn't need to be installed. Looking further back, the superstructure continues upwards, but this is clear on all sides, so that can be another set. There may be other joint lines that need to be smoothed in above there, but at least at this level I can reset and start from there. So this is the minimal structure that needs to be constructed before installation on the ship. And as for joint lines that will need to be sorted out on the ship, it's really just this one over here. Now that I know which parts I'm working with, I can look into the specifics of the modifications that I need to do with them. Starting with the photo etch. On the lower levels of the superstructure, the vents need to be replaced. There's some platforms that need to be installed, photo etch hand railings and ladders, along with this photo etch structure over there, and obviously a photo etch anti-aircraft gun. Of all of these components, I think the only parts that I really need to install before I place this on the ship are these vent covers. The other photo etch on this part only needs to be installed after this part is glued onto the ship. Moving up to this platform, there are also multiple photo etch modifications that need to be installed. These plastic parts need to be cut off the back and replaced with photo etch, along with photo etch ladders, and these gaps over here in this plastic part need to be filled in so that there is a smooth surface. These will then fit replacement ladders. Going up yet again, there are more photo etch ladders to be installed. Here we see the instructions for the replacement photo etch huts. The modifications to these parts don't end with the photo etch. The HMS Hood Association also recommends multiple corrections to these parts. On the lower levels of the superstructure, this bulkhead needs to be extended to this curved section and then wrapped around a little bit. To do that, I'll use some styrene stock. The same needs to be repeated on the other side. On this part, this area underneath the location where the 1/2-inch machine guns are located needs to be cut out and hollowed. This section of plastic should not be solid, so I need to cut this out and then refill the interior and create bulkheads with more plastic stock. Moving aft, this bulge needs to be cut out. This should be a smooth surface. The mirror of this needs to be repeated on the other side. After cutting out this bulge and flattening this wall, a tunnel needs to be constructed to connect this structure to the support for the gun director. The last modification for this area of the ship is to ensure that all of these gaps are the same height. This is the most problematic gap. It is far too high, so I'll insert a strip of styrene stock to reduce the size of that opening. And then I will also be sure to blend out these seam lines so that there is a smooth finish across the entire height of the component. Due to the large number of modifications, both with photo etch and with scratch building, I suspect I'm going to be working on this area of the ship for quite some time. In the next video, I'll start by working on the bridge section and focus on closing up these gaps to get them all to the same height and then removing these seam lines between these parts. If you would like to support this channel or see how this ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.